Today, MentorTime. Yay, our first of 2025. I'm back to Mardi Gras pom-poms. Between Mardi Gras and Valentine's Day, I'll alternate red and green and yellow and purple. Today, we're going to talk about what counts as experience and how to describe it. We have covered most of the information I'm going to present today in various topics in the past. The most recent one was how to describe work when you have assistant in your title. Some of this may not be new to you, but putting it together was useful for me to put it together and try to figure out where we need more examples. All right, the takeaway. Almost everything you do counts as experience, a very broad definition, and it's all in how you describe it. So there are reasons, and we'll talk about volunteering. Generally, you're going to want to put it under experience, especially if it's in the last 5 years or so. Here's what we're covering today. We're going to talk about experience question mark. What does that really mean? And then how you can describe it for the various situations you're in. And as we always do, we end with what should you do? And it's not a long list. All right, we have a few people here. You can either use the chat box or use Slido. Tell me if you think, just thinking about it right now on your long CV or your resume or whatever document you consider where you want to be adding this into. Do you have something that you think could be counted as experience, but maybe it hasn't been shown on your resume or CV yet? Yes, no, or possibly. I've been very vague in terms of how I describe that question. But basically, I just want you to think again. Oh, yeah, I forgot. I've been donating blood for the last 20 years and whatever you've contributed to it for. Oh, I organize the health fair once a year for my church. Yes, possibly. Great. Thank you for using Slido. We can see it up here. And in the chat box, I don't see anything yet, so that's fine. Go ahead and keep filling it in while I move something that moved off of. Sorry, I've got Fathom on top of everything else I'm trying to do. All right, let's hope I can see the slides because I can't see the previews. All right. Oh, you have a box over here. Let me just try to get this out of here. You all can see that big share button. No, I don't want to share the app.
No, all we can see is the experience slide.
You can't see the black box on it?
No,
Okay.
looks
Then
good.
I'm just great. Then I'm just going to go ahead. I think I know most of the slides that I'm doing today. All right. So when I say experience question mark, here's the kinds of things I hear from you all. Sue, I did some group projects in graduate school. Can I list all of those? She says. Or I volunteer in a lot of different places. What do I do about that stuff? And I occasionally get people who say, I'm the one they call on for all this extra stuff. I'm supposed to arrange parties and track the birthdays. And sometimes even the C-suite wants me to set up meetings if someone's not there to help them. So in the chat box, as I was asking you to think about, do you have something that you haven't yet counted as experience? If you don't mind sharing it, I'd love to know just briefly, what do you think you've identified that you might want to now count as experience? GIS map making from coursework. Oh, I love that, Peter. That's really a good idea. Let's see if it fits. Ron says, I used to not count volunteer work and now I do. And Priscilla says, one of my challenges is concurrent employment, having more than 2 jobs at once. Yeah, that can be challenging, sure. And Priyanka, welcome, says designing and coding surveys. Just what you want to be doing in your free time, but you do it. So yes, these are all great examples. Here's a definition I made up, meaning here's how I think about experience. We're applying our knowledge and skills in a career situation because knowledge plus skills put into practice is experience. But here's why it's experience. If something contributes to a larger outcome and incorporates expected norms and standards for work, this is something I've used now for over a decade. You show up on time, you collaborate with others, you deliver results that are useful to and used by others. You may provide mentoring and supervision. Basically, when you show up in volunteer situations, civic engagement, when you show up as a graduate student or undergraduate student, these are all work characteristics that you can show putting into practice, even if it's not whatever you consider a job. Now, notice this word didn't appear anywhere in what I just defined. I think probably most of you who attend this and maybe watching the recording, we've had discussions in the last 2 years because of COVID about all the volunteer work we do, which is actually real work. Think about the people who developed at Hopkins, developed on their own time the COVID tracking system. They got it up and running in something like 3 or 4 weeks. They did that all in their night job after they were doing their day jobs as professors. We're going to ignore whether or not you got paid, whether or not you do it full time at any point in time, and look at what kind of work it is. And we'll start first with describing your experience. And we're going to start first with in your actual job. If this is a job that you work for a company, you have your own consulting business, you do freelance work, you chose to do part-time work, doesn't matter the duration, the number of hours. What matters is what kind of work you're doing. Here's the kinds of things you may remember I've said before, but what your work produces, those outcomes, it's not the doing. It's not the list of I did this, I did that, I did data analysis, I did data cleaning, I made dummy tables. We don't call them that anymore. Anyway, standard tables. It's the done. It's what did you contribute? So I want to go over for you the formula I've used for 15 years. When you think about your work, first of all, recognize that almost all of our work has an internal component, meaning you and the company you work with, you and your team, you, me, Ron, others as solopreneurs, me, and me. But 75% of our work, when you think about it, should be able to be grouped under 2 to 3 big, what I call big work task areas. Those task areas are big buckets. If you can't think about your job as 2 to 3 task areas, think about it this way. The internal component would be you managing your work with a team for your boss, meeting company objectives. If you have a freelance business, you would be tracking your revenue goals, your scheduling, your client types, all of those things. You would be doing work internally, and you may be hiring subcontractors or service purchases if you need data viz done or something like that. The external part of it is what you do interacting with an external audience. Usually it's clients, beneficiaries. I don't love that word, but the people that are being helped by the work we do, the funding agencies, that is your external work. In some case, you may be in a job where your external work is actually your division is serving another division or department in your company. And that occasionally happens, that you are a technical resource for the other departments or department. But that way, when you pull it to the larger task area, then you can put in 2 to 3 achievements under each of your big task area bullets. Here's something from a couple years ago, someone who gave me permission to share her work. This was from her work she was doing technical assistance and support from a headquarters position working in Vietnam and other places. But we see that she had a whole area in her work on policy research and analysis. which was her technical skills in doing work that was going to be developed to document things. And then partnership and coordination, that's more the external part of her job, collaborating with the Ministry of Health, working with senior Vietnamese officials, coordinating with WHO to different working groups. So that gives you the chance to think higher level and also think what contributions what outcomes am I contributing to? Here's another quick example from someone who, this was from her CV review. So you'll see a lot of underscores. And the blanks there are because I'm asking her to provide more context, more information that shows complexity, who she's working with, how her work is getting out to others. But she has one big area, which is delivering M&E services to so many programs. That's her external work. Her internal work is research and program activities, conducting some research that she did and disseminated the findings. So that helps you then identify what you're bringing as larger products, larger outcomes, rather than saying, I did this. You may not have seen this, but I have actually a formula, and this, sorry, I enlarged the picture, it's a little blurry, for writing evidence-based results, and I made it into more of a visual sheet that you could fill in the action verb that leads to an outcome, and then what's the outcome. The how did you do it? You may fill in for whom. It might be for an audience like a funder or a set of parents if you're working in a school. And the with what, again, that can be optional, but you may want to mention in this case they use Kobo Toolbox, unusual enough that it's probably worth mentioning here, not just in a skills list. In the last almost year, I've focused on getting people to write even higher level results, and that is starting with your outcome. So it puts it on the left margin. You may remember I say the left margin's your best friend in this scrolling and scanning days. But it also helps us take, for example, that first example, conducted web analytics to ensure marketing campaign starts with data and analytics to develop and optimize marketing efforts. Good first effort. But let's skip down to the second arrow. The outcome really is increase the brand recognition in his company. And this was a real example that someone had given me. By developing and optimizing marketing efforts. That was at the end of the first bullet, the very top example. That's always at the end. You don't want people to have to go to the end to find out what you did. The by or through is where you get this is what I did. And then he said to ensure the marketing campaign has baseline data. To me, that says subliminally, oh, the comms and marketing people are the audience for getting this. And there are some more examples there. I also have a little worksheet on this. I will send out the links to these resources. They're also in the course, the professional presence course in step 2. They're there as well. What if you're an administrative assistant? I get this a lot. When the title is assistant, research assistant, technical assistant, financial assistant, administrative assistant, this is what the person gave us when Ron and I reviewed her. It's almost a year and a half now, I think, Ron. And she said, Sue, this is what I do, but I'm busy all day long. Come to find out, she really was much more of the key communication hub person. And I said to her, it sounds like you act like the communications hub and liaison because you're the one funneling messages all around. I have the feeling that she did a lot more of email and electronic messages than some of the chiefs she worked for did. But her work ended up being higher level. She ensured that the department was functioning efficiently, 7-person department, by providing administrative support. So she delivers advice to customers. There's the external. She acts as the communications hub internally to make sure everybody gets messages for whoever needs to respond to them. And she's also, again, internally developed a system to manage inventory so she can provide the manager at any point in time with purchasing needs because of what she's doing. And so that took her work to a very different level. The work she was already doing, it's just how she described it wasn't giving her or her company the credit for everything that she brought to them. Moving on, next we get to describing expertise as a university student. Most of the time, and someone last week said this on a review meeting to Ron and me, she said she had 2 years of experience, but she talked about a larger academic career. And when we talked to her, she said, I thought I couldn't count experience till I got my degree. And I said, oh, no, I don't think that's true. But that's how we've all been framed. That's what I was taught when I was much younger. I developed this framework when we covered this topic separately in Mentor Time. And the most important part about it is not the first three that help you identify what you did and what your role was, but the last one, the audience for work that you do during school, depends on who it's going to, whether or not it counts as experience. If the professor or the TA grades the work, you basically are doing work that will train you, that may even be a real data set, but the information is not going anywhere and being used. So it's meeting the grade purpose, it's meeting your learning purpose being in grad school. If you're at working, for example, as a research assistant for a professor or staff, you may be working on a project or a study where the results will be used and will be used by at least one person, either the professor or staff using it themselves or turning it over to someone else who's on the study or the project. Sometimes I know at Tulane there was a big work study program to provide project assistance to some of the department offices, so they were working on administrative and research support. And occasionally you will have your results shared with an external audience. If a PI is working in Uganda and needs briefing results developed from the tables that you ran for data analysis, that would be definitely would be learning as experience, because that PI is counting on that being correct information to present to the external client. Here's the three examples I get most commonly on people's CVs when they're in graduate school or just finished. I wrote a thesis. A thesis is not, I looked at this and wrote this, and they said the person who put this in wrote it over 2 months. Remember, the whole point of a thesis, of a graduate degree where there's a thesis requirement, is you are supposed to learn all about research methods, how to apply them, how to do the research, how to collect data, how to analyze it, and then do something with the results. So his 3 lines turned into several major task areas. So he never defined the study before, but now defining the study and what the study is doing, and then articulates. I developed the research protocol, did the IRB. That's a big thing. If you're going to be doing research a lot, it's good to show that you developed and got that approval already in grad school. You knew how to do it. Started primary data collection, analyzed some existing training database information, and then did his defense and also talked about delivering results at 2 different, a conference and a brief that he wrote. Students, but this isn't just for students, for all of you, I get things like, I was elected to serve, I was asked to volunteer for X. And it's something that is volunteer leadership. Civic engagement is what I like to call it, where you're doing something for an organization or a group that is needing your help. In this case, it was a student example. This person said, I represented them. I was elected to the position in a competitive process, which is important but not critical, and then identified issues of resilience. When we talked to him, it turned out that what was really important was this was the only student representative to this curriculum advisory council. And as such, he defined and brought an education strategy to them, got it approved, and they started rolling it out. So it was much larger than just being tapped to serve as the student representative. And in the last area, we often get people who've done TA, teaching assistant work. I didn't even put in it was basically about 4 words. The person who wrote her original information on her CV said, I was a teaching assistant and I helped the professor however he needed it. But this is what it turned into being. It was Epidemiology 201. She identified, the professor asked her, identify different methods for labs and assignments, try to implement a peer pairing approach so that they can get help from each other, as well as the office hours that I want you to run. The student also occasionally did a class and did do some grading, but we didn't call it grading. We amplified it as, did the student have or the teaching assistant have the opportunity not just to grade progress, but to look at and examine whether or not they were getting and retaining and becoming more proficient in the concepts and practical acquisition of the knowledge that was being taught. And the last area I want to talk about is volunteer work. It often is work expertise. A decade ago, I came up with this formula. It's not written in stone anywhere, but it's a guide. Do you do something every week? I deliver Meals on Wheels for an hour a week. Or once a month, I work for Habitat for Humanity and we work an 8-hour day. And have you done it for at least 2 to 3 months, meaning monthly for 2 to 3 months? If you do 1 to 2 hours a week, have you made it, say, 4 to 6 weeks? That formula is such that you can then demonstrate the things that I told you were in what I set out as standards for work experience. Are you showing up on time? Are you collaborating with team members? Are you contributing to the outcomes? Are you providing help and supervision and mentoring if that's what's needed? So larger work areas, a larger experience where you can show that you're meeting work attendance. As a side note, I occasionally get asked for writing a reference letter for mentees that I have that I've worked with for 6 months or more. And the program I had with one person was a year-long program. So I wrote his reference. This was way, way back a long time ago. But I wrote and said, here's how I judge his work characteristics. Does he show up prepared for the mentee meeting we have? Does he do his assignments and work on time? Is he engaged in taking active control of his professional development? It must have helped. He got the fellowship that he wanted, and his career's been brilliant since then. It wasn't just my letter, but do you see how you can frame any volunteer activity as something where you are treating it as work? Because if you're volunteering, you're likely very passionate. I know Sue rarely uses that word, right? Passionate, committed to, dedicated to the cause. And that usually means work experience. So the formula, use it if that's helpful, but this is the way it might come out. Here's someone who was a tutor for a grade 8 student. He needed some help getting his academic English. So she talked about designing lessons, grading, and providing feedback. And at the last bullet, led to improvement. But here's what actually she did. She managed over a whole school term to help him improve his academic English and his grade. By is what she did. She engaged the student. She designed lessons on subjects of interest to him. She increased his learning and retention by grading and providing feedback on the assignments. And then I wrote in, then discussing it with the student, which again, that's the self-reflection that you get. And here's an example of someone who was graduating from school, and her university in Sudan closed down for a year, almost 2 years. She had established a small community around her technical area of laboratory sciences. And she developed and did this impact and outreach to students all over Sudan to keep them represented in their field of laboratory science, but also to give them updates and all. So this doesn't have so much of the outcome language, but she certainly provided the outcomes of what she did. For example, the academic support and mentorship to 75 final high school students. All right, so what should you do? You're going to have to take a deep look because the big thing here is for you to inventory work that you've done and work you've been doing in the last year or two where maybe you haven't had time to come to our semi-annual CV update or you haven't thought about it. I want you to identify work that you can now rewrite for outcome-based evidence statements if you're interested in taking them that far, but at least writing evidence-based results. And I want you to reevaluate your civic engagement and volunteer activities and which ones you could add to as experience. Because the other thing that happens when you have volunteer and civic engagement, and it's happening at the same time that your job, if you've got a full-time job, is happening, then you're showing your ability to multitask and handle a large amount of commitment, the commitment to your full-time job, and also take on the leadership of maybe an APHA subgroup, one of the technical interest groups or whatever. So very short to-do list, but it might take you time. Anybody want to volunteer in the chat box about things that, as I've talked, you think about, oh, I think I have 4 or 5 things to change, or maybe you have nothing to change. That's fine too. I'm just curious if anybody has any experience they want to share of what this might have unearthed for them.
Hey, Sue.
Oh, hi, Priyanka. Hi, Essie. Yeah, Priyanka, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember taking this. I know you did this a couple of months earlier as well, and it helped me a lot to realize some of the things that I'm doing. But it's funny, when you started this, I was like, oh, I did this. I don't know if anything new is going to come out. But as we were talking, I just realized there were a couple of other things that I forgot that I can add to my resume again and my long CV. So I'm glad I did this again.
Thank you, Priyanka. I love that. I didn't even ask her to do that. She's fun. Yeah, that's what happens. You suddenly realize, oh, I can recast it in value. So great. Thank you. Anybody else? Unmute, or you can definitely put something in the chat box if you prefer. Not so far. I said before, oh, Peter said he wants to review his points on his resume with outcome statements. I love that. And for you, Peter, that would be really helpful because of the different kinds of jobs you've had over the last few years. That'll help you focus on that, on those outcomes. I need to start tracking the numbers of webinars and other than MentorTime that I've been giving over not a lot every year, but going from 6 to 10 or so. Priscilla says, put the action, verb, and outcomes first. Yes, thank you. And you got a lot of support for that. I think that's really important and it really distinguishes you. And it's not that you need to write it so much, but writing it means it's in your brain here and there to use as examples. And when you start talking about the outcomes, people start to notice, oh, she contributes to the larger unit that she's in by doing X and Y. Thank you for those contributions. They're great. I just want to end with the takeaway before I ask Ron for comments. A lot more can be counted as experience if you're describing it in a way that people can understand what it is that you did that makes it experience. Just as a comment, I have no problem with you telling me you went away for 2 weeks and did something intensive like volunteering for, I think in the Galapagos, you can volunteer for something on helping them count their turtles, whatever. That can be a very valid activity. Just learn how to describe it so that when someone's hiring you, they're not thinking, oh, all she's going to do is travel and go volunteer for another ECHO program. But they're going to look at, oh, she applied her monitoring and eval skills to helping them get a better database with more precise language. Ron, comments, thoughts? What are you thinking way down there in
Yeah.
Mexico?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that just towards the end here you talked about, and it reminds me that getting skillful at describing what you have accomplished on behalf of your employer or the place you work with as a volunteer or whatever, but that idea of the accomplishments, the outcomes being very important, and having that approach to describing that carries forward to the job interview. That carries forward to other things. So acquiring that skill, acquiring that ability, and getting used to the idea of describing your behavior, your work experience in terms of helping your employer do better at what the employer does, because that's ultimately what an outcome is. And so in getting good at doing that means that when you're sitting in an interview, when you're talking to your friends, when you're standing in the elevator and somebody says, "What the heck do you do?" That sounds weird. What is that? And then you give the express, you can explain it in terms of accomplishments and outcomes. All of a sudden, it becomes important to the person who's listening to you. They may say, "Hey, tell me more. I'm really excited by that." Next thing you know, you're in a network and all that stuff can happen. But I think it's just brilliant. And I really love the model that Sue has created. It's a very good one. I wish I'd created it. I'm jealous. Anyway, but you use it. It's a really good model. And I think it can help you in all sorts of circumstances, not just in the CV. It's not just in your bio para. It's not just there. It's when you talk to others about what it is you do. You've got this language going on in your head, and it's outcomes oriented. So anyway, but sorry, that's all I got to comment.
Oh, it's great. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Anybody have any last comments while I straighten out my camera? I noticed it's tilting. All right. Any last comments? Anybody want to unmute and say anything? Happy to hear from you. Peter?
Sue, I liked the slide where you had the each little section of how to write that statement, and I think that can be really helpful. So that's a really good piece.
I'll send the link out to all of you when I send this captioned recording out tomorrow because it's on the web in a Google Slides. I think I did it in Google Slides for a presentation. And I have a presentation where I did this 2 years ago for Brenda Miller's group. But yeah, it just takes practice. But all of you have worked with me in some fashion with Ron and me. You know that we're focusing on getting the evidence-based statements out there. And you all are doing a really good job. And now you get to get even more bang for your buck. Because it's true, Ron. Someone just emailed me and said, I just want you to know I had my annual review and I updated what I worked on with you last year and I got this huge passing mark. I don't know how she described it, but she said it went very well and he had no changes. He was really happy with it. Yes, is it Ron and me? A little bit, but what we're doing is giving you the tools and you're putting them into practice. So thank you for doing that. All right, one last call for comments and then I'll ask Ron to close the meeting. I had a question from Essie. How far back do you recommend going on revising your resume? Here's the rule of thumb right now. At least do your your recent jobs, either what you're doing now or just finished doing now if you're unfortunately, which you may be Essie, affected by the AID close down, and the previous job before then. At least go back 5 years and revise the language on that, on your long CV, on your resume. Most people aren't going to scan beyond that, and I'm willing to bet that your jobs have changed dramatically in 5 years, maybe even 3 or 4. So it's more just to get you being seen as what you most recently, most in your most senior position contributed. Hope that helps you. Ron, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because that's a good question. And because the rule used to be 10 years. And I think that 10-year window is a good one. But in terms of applying extra effort to the last sort of 3 to 5 years, I think that's really required. And I think that would accomplish what you're looking to accomplish. Yeah, you still can illustrate the work you have done in the last 10 years. But in terms of applying it, and like Sue said, is these senior jobs, the jobs where, that are closer, because that is closer to where the person who's considering you to work with them is likely to do. Now, there are exceptions to it. I want to bring this out because I'm involved in the hiring process here in Mexico, and we just hired somebody on the basis of experience that was older because his most recent jobs were unrelated to what we were hiring him for. So remember that also. And so in this case, we're bringing somebody into an employment position based on older work. So it works both ways. And given it really comes down to is what is it you want to do over the next number of years? And if you're applying for a position, that's certainly what you want to emphasize.
Great. Thank you, Ron. That leads right into when we're meeting again. I think it's 2 weeks. And I can't remember the topic. You're all on the email list. You'll get a reminder. So, Ron, if you'll close the meeting, that would be great.
Yeah, everyone. Thanks very much for attending today. Great topic, Sue. Thank you very much. I appreciate the level of effort you put into helping us improve our ability to express ourselves in the workplace and beyond. So thank you very much for it. Thank you for the rest of you for taking time out of your day. And for me, I'm enjoying, because this is a holiday here in Mexico. Not that I really celebrate holidays, but I thank you for allowing us to come together and talk about these important matters. So look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
All right, everybody, take care.